Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie and today we'll be talking about 7 things I bought that I never used when homebrewing. Avoid these purchases. Number 1 is a pH digital meter. Honestly, when I started, I wanted to be fancy, but little do you know that there is a cheaper version of this pH digital meter, and it is in the form of pH strips. This is what you use in your pool if you want to know the pH of your pool. And why do you need to know the pH in alcohol terms? It's for the yeast to work. So the optimal pH for the yeast to be effective is at 5.2. And let's say your pH is too low, your juice is too acid, or your fruits are too acid. The pH is going to be lower than 5. And if you want to increase it, you have to add calcium carbonate. And when you add calcium carbonate, the pH is going to increase. But how to test if it has reached 5? That's when you would use a pH measurement. And honestly, the pH digital meter is more expensive. You need to calibrate it. So I would just go for the pH strips. You could buy this at Walmart for a cheap price, even on Amazon. It cost me $1.43 for my last pH strips. Oh, and by the way, in my primary brewing days, to increase the pH, I added baking soda, and avoid this. So when I added the baking soda, it affected the taste of the alcohol. It was disgusting. It tasted toxic. However, when adding calcium carbonate, on the other hand, it does not affect the taste. Therefore, your wine is going to still taste like wine, or your beer or your cider is still going to taste the same as you intended to taste like. Another thing that I bought and never used, okay, initially I had doubts, should I use powdered yeast or liquid yeast? So I bought both. And so far I've been using EC1118 because it makes my wine taste good, my cider taste good. But I also bought liquid winemaking yeast just in case. Just wanted to see what it's like, how the flavors will be affected. And personally, I didn't notice that much of a difference, so I just stick to the EC1118. It comes in multiple tiny packages, therefore you could buy it once and you can use it for a very long time. On the contrary, winemaking yeast comes in one packet. It's a bit larger, it's liquid. However, I wasn't able to get any bubbles right away. Therefore, I used this winemaking yeast once for experimentation and never used it again. It's still in my fridge. Probably have to check the expiration date because I believe there is one. Contrarily to the EC1118, since it's powder, it lasts way longer. It has much longer shelf life than liquid yeast. Speaking of yeast, some yeast that I have used once and never again are turbo yeast. Turbo yeast is usually a beginner's yeast. It's what you use if you want to make quick alcohol. It can make it in 48 hours. And this is what you use when you start. When you're learning the ropes, turbo yeast is usually a beginner's recommendation. Why? Because it includes yeast nutrient as well. And the yeast plus the yeast nutrient makes your alcohol quicker. So makes the yeast react quicker to the sugar, so it produces alcohol quicker. I have not used turbo yeast again after discovering EC1118 because the flavors are a little bit different. I must admit, a lot of people say they have off flavors when using turbo yeast. And let me know in the comments below, have you used turbo yeast? And if so, did you get any off flavors when using that yeast? Another type of yeast that I initially bought but never used was the distiller's yeast, and this was a mistake because I do not even distill my alcohol. So distillation, for those that want to know what it is when you transform your alcohol. Let's say you're 5 to 20% alcohol that's been fermented and you want to increase the alcohol percentage by a certain number of percentage. So let's say you want to make your 5% beer and transform it into a 40% alcohol. That's when you need a still. Same thing for other types of fermented drinks like wine or cider. If you want to increase the alcohol intensity, that's when you need a still. And this is illegal where I live, therefore I do not own a still. And this yeast is specifically for distilled drinks. When I tried it, the taste wasn't great. It did not taste like any of the alcohols that I wanted to produce, which is wine, cider, or beer. Therefore, I never used it again. It was a waste. And it came in a big pack too. So I bought that at the beginning when I didn't know which yeast to use. That was the first yeast after turbo yeast that I bought. I was asking myself, what other yeast can I use that does not affect the flavors of my alcohol? I went with distiller's yeast. However, once you discover EC1118, usually winemakers stick to that one. Another ingredient slash item that I used once and I don't really use again is yellow sugar. So yellow sugar is typically, or brown sugar, Yellow sugar or brown sugar is typically more expensive than white sugar, and initially most of my recipes were done with yellow sugar. I wanted to verify if you would have a different taste, and yes, there is a different taste if you compare different types of sugar. This is because of the concentration of molasses in yellow or brown sugar. In white sugar, there are no molasses. That's why it's white. However, they are interchangeable. So the taste will differ, yes. However, if you want to go for the cheaper option, you can go with white sugar, and it works well for beer, red wine. I typically make my cider with yellow sugar still. However, it's the only alcohol that I use yellow sugar with. If ever I'm in a drought and I need to get more sugar, I can always replace this yellow sugar in my cider with white sugar. Therefore, if you're really trying to cut costs, white sugar is completely fine. The fourth item that I've bought in my homebrewing life that I barely use, I used once, are flavoring extracts. So I know how people like to flavor their alcohol. However, in my opinion, I like it to be flavored by the original ingredients like sugar, the juice that you use, the hops, therefore natural ingredients. And by adding flavor, which are in the form of liquid extracts, it doesn't really affect the taste much. You have to add a bunch of liquid for it to affect the flavoring. And in my opinion, it wasn't worth it using a lot of liquid extract to flavor your alcohol. Therefore, I stopped adding it and made sure that the primary ingredients in my alcohol were good quality and tasted good at the beginning before fermentation, because usually the ingredients that you put in before fermentation will influence the quality of your drink post fermentation. So the better the quality of the ingredients, the better the final product. Simple as that. And in terms of flavoring, so some might have added fruits or they've added non-liquid flavoring inside your alcohol. Personally, I prefer the liquid format because it blends in with the alcohol. And unlike fruits, there's no risk of rot. So when you leave your fruits inside your alcohol for too long, you might have to dunk it in the alcohol to keep preserving it and for it not to be rotten. Or you might have to remove them after a few days just to make sure the alcohol doesn't absorb the rotten fruit flavor. A fifth ingredient that I don't use anymore in my homebrewing life is juice with preservatives. So juice is looking pretty in the aisles of the grocery stores, and you might think, wow, why not use this to make my wine or to make my cider? However, watch out if there are preservatives in the juice. This will give the yeast a hard time to eat the sugar. Therefore, when there are preservatives in the juice, alcohol might be created a bit. However, it tends to stall the yeast. Therefore, the alcohol is never fully made at the end. Let's say that your alcohol is being created, and then at one point it stops because of the preservatives. The preservatives inhibit the yeast from eating the rest of the sugar, and your drink just stays there at, let's say, 2% alcohol, 4% alcohol, depending on how much sugar has been eaten by the yeast. So the solution to this is getting juice without preservatives, or there are two preservatives that are okay with the yeast. These are malic acid and ascorbic acid. Even if these preservatives are present inside the juice, the yeast will work and will produce the alcohol that you'd like. However, in general, do not buy juice with preservatives because your alcohol will not reach its full potential, and the fermentation has high chances of being stuck and not being completed until the end. A little anecdote, I tried to make white wine, and I've tried this with multiple ingredients. I tried once mashing my own fruits, putting it inside the fermenting jar, or using water mixed with a little bit of yellow sugar to affect the color a little bit. Nothing worked. However, what recently has been used has been white cranberry juice, and this white cranberry juice had citric acid in there, so that is a preservative. Therefore, once I added the yeast, the fermentation was stuck. And I've heard from a lot of brewers that a trick to get this yeast working again is to add brewer's yeast inside. Therefore, by adding brewer's yeast, I did see that the fermentation restarted and that the white wine process kept on going. So one trick is, if you have preservatives in your juice, you can add brewer's yeast to help it go a little bit longer in its fermentation journey and help it eat more sugar. And drop a comment below and let me know, do you use other aspects to help fermentation? Other options are putting your fermentation jar in a warmer environment, or to stirring the fermentation jar to make sure the yeast is active, and to look at the airlock to see the status of the fermentation. A sixth item that I would never use again in my homebrewing experience are oak chips. And yes, I know that people age their wine, and some people who don't have oak barrels need to put oak chips inside their alcohol to make it age a little bit, give it a more mature flavor. However, last time I added this, I added way too many oak chips and it just tasted like wood. It tasted like a green forest. It was not delicious. And in my opinion, I wouldn't use this anymore. If I want to keep my alcohol in for a long period, I could always transfer the alcohol in the primary fermentation into a secondary fermentation, or I just drink it quicker. And in my opinion, if after the primary fermentation it tastes decent, I do not need to keep aging it to drink the alcohol. I would just drink it after the primary fermentation to avoid waiting times and to start a new batch right away. And for these oak chips that I wouldn't reuse, so just for those who want to use oak chips, just putting it out there, but first you have to wash them, make sure that they're dried, and then toast them, and then add them into the alcohol. So you can't just take chopped wood and put it directly inside the alcohol. They have to be treated and prepared first. Similarly to all the equipment you use, so make sure that it's sanitized well by using Star San, or boiling water also helps. You must make sure that it's disinfected so there's no bacteria, microbes, mold, anything dirty that would be in contact with your final product. And now the seventh ingredient that I would not use, again, it's tannin powder. Why did I buy tannin powder? This is for wine. If you want to make your wine more bitter, if you want to have this je ne sais quoi taste in your mouth, some people add tannin powder. However, what I use simply is bitter juice. So for red wine, I use bitter organic cranberry juice, and this bitterness translates into the final alcohol product. Therefore, I do not need to add tannin powder. And when I've added it before, it did not taste good. It's hard to describe tannin powder, but it didn't taste like the wine from the store. It tasted bitter, all right, but the taste wasn't doing it for me. It's not a taste that I enjoyed. Therefore, I do not add tannin powder. I just make sure that the initial ingredients make the wine bitter in the first place. And you know what? I'm gonna give you a little bonus for staying until the end of this video. So I'm gonna give you an eighth aspect that I bought, but honestly, I don't really use. So these are units of measurement. So I bought a scale and I also bought cups. Therefore, if you're on a strict budget and you cannot afford both a scale or cups to, let's say, measure your sugar or your liquid, you can eye it. I know this is not usually suggested. However, let's say you buy a 2-kilogram bag of sugar. If you have to add 1 kilogram of sugar, you could just eye it until half of the bag is empty. Therefore, just approximate your measures, and a few milligrams here or there or a few milliliters more or less will not affect the taste significantly. I say you could just do it as if you're baking and just eyeball it. And if the taste is not good, then that's when you would change your recipe. However, minor differences will not affect the taste at all. The most important measurement that you need is the measurement of the hydrometer inside a cylinder. And what this measures is the percentage of alcohol that you'll create. So if you want to get technical, you have to use a cylinder and a hydrometer at the beginning, so before fermentation and after the fermentation. And what this does is it's gonna measure the amount of sugar before fermentation and see how much sugar is lost in the process until the end of the fermentation. And once you know how much sugar has been reduced from your alcohol, you can determine the percentage of alcohol that you've produced. Why? Because all this sugar that has reduced is transformed into alcohol. So this will be determined with a hydrometer and a cylinder. And if you like more tips and tricks on how to measure alcohol, book a class. The link is in the description below. And if you found this video valuable, share with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram. We post more content on that platform. I'll see you in the next video.